Welcome to the Corolosophy Podcast. This is Chris Muntz, and I am closing out 2020 with a look back on the things that you reacted to the most in 2020. And first, before we get into all of that, I just want to thank the audience, the listeners. 2020 was a year of huge growth for the show, and I could not have done it without you all, and your interaction and your choice to listen is hugely beneficial to me personally, because I get to then keep having these conversations, and it's doing me a lot of good. I've learned how to be a better listener. I've learned how to be a better conversationalist. I've learned how to be a better choir director, all from doing this show. And if it wasn't being received by you, then there would be no reason to do it. So thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you for being a part of the conversation. I'm going to start this way. I'm going to start first by, this might sound like bragging, but I want you to know what you've helped us do here. And mostly because I think if you don't know this, then it's very hard for you to understand what it is that we're trying to create here and be a part of. So the first thing, 2020 versus 2019, the show just exploded. You know, this is the second year of the show. Started in February of 2019, and in 2020, we approximately tripled the amount of traffic on the show. So that is pretty awesome. Now, one thing I'll say right off the bat is that I'm hoping that that rate of growth does not continue. And here's what I mean by that. Most of that rate of growth came in April and May when the COVID crisis hit our profession specifically. And so I don't anticipate that explosion of traffic, because some people really truly came to the show just for those episodes, and they listened to the COVID stuff and they're not going to listen to the other stuff. So I'm assuming that means there's quite a bit of non-choir people listening to those episodes, and so their stats kind of explode, and then everything else is a little bit more normal. However, the show also dealt with some other issues this year on kind of disproportionately. And those are issues related to equity, diversity, social justice related issues. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of my memories of those types of episodes, as well as just some overall big picture stats from the year that you helped create. So first thing I'm very excited about is that the website, corolosophy.com, had 16,000 plus unique visitors this year. That's awesome and just amazing. And a couple of reminders of things over at corolosophy.com. It's the home, I should say, of all of the episodes. So you can see a podcast feed there. You can also see information about some of the vendors that we work with here on the show. So that's your Graphite Publishing, Ryan Main, Voce Vista, Sight Reading Factory, My Music Folders, My Choir Robes, all those awesome companies that partner with the show. You can see more information about that. You can click links and find those products. There's lots of things you can do. And more recently at corolosophy.com, you can put direct feedback into things you hear on the show, including asking, hey, could I come on the show and talk about one of these things I heard? One of my goals for 2021 is to have more of that happen. So the most recent episode you might have heard is episode 52, where that's exactly what that was. It was John and Nathan reaching out and having more questions, and so we did another show on that topic, and I'd love to see more and more of that stuff happening. So big website traffic, and we're talking about 16,000 people from all over the world, probably 30-something different countries. Just so some fun facts, of course, the U.S. is at the top of the list in terms of views, followed by Canada, the U.K., Australia, Mexico, China, Ireland, and Singapore are the top countries that have visited corolosophy.com this year in 2020. So that's really cool. Another pretty interesting and fun stat is that in 2020 alone, the Corolosophy podcast was downloaded or watched on YouTube over 250,000 times, which is just unbelievable, just a remarkable thing. And I didn't anticipate that kind of number in 2020. So I just appreciate all of that and your listenership and your being involved. Okay, so where did all that traffic come from? Let's talk about that. So obviously, the top episode of 2020 was episode 33, and that was the episode with Amish Adalja of Johns Hopkins, directly responding in very, very short order after the May 5th webinar. So the story there is that, and I shared this a little bit in some Patreon-only episodes over the course of the year, but I'll give you some of the feedback, or some of the overview, I should say, here, which is that in episode 33, came about really on the spur of the moment. I struck while the iron was hot. If you remember back in early May when the webinar came out and it got memed, right? It got turned into a memed version, which was very oversimplified, and it included a very harmful quote from the webinar, which it turns out in hindsight was not a very scientific quote, but it was that choir would not be safe, or singing would not be safe for 2 years until there's a vaccine. There is a remarkable number of people, if I go digging into Facebook groups, that still believe that. However, we dug into that statement a little bit more with Dr. Adalja, and we discovered several things that are oversimplified about that statement that was made on that webinar. You can't, number one, decide something is safe or unsafe. That's not a scientific statement. It's maybe a moral statement at best, but ultimately it's oversimplified. Risk, we discovered in that conversation and with many other doctors after that, is a spectrum. It is not a binary. There is no moment at which the risk for anything becomes zero. And so to say that it's not safe is a value judgment. It's not a scientific statement. In other words, everyone has a different risk tolerance. And so we went on to discuss things like understanding who your target audience is when making decisions about singing. Are you dealing with kids where the risk is super low? I mean, we're talking about way lower than the flu at this point for kids under 18. Are you talking about a school choir? Are you talking about a teacher in that school choir who's relatively healthy and also young in a low-risk category? Or are you talking about an adult church choir where everybody's 65 and older? Well, those are very different calculations. And so we went through in a series of conversations that was sparked by that episode with Dr. Adalja, which, by the way, was downloaded about 10,000 times. It's the biggest number that I've seen on the show so far. Like I said earlier, that is probably an outlier. I'm not gonna have that many people downloading all these episodes, but that one drew a lot of attention because he's a very high-profile expert. And so the point being that conversation then led to a series of conversations which also are called COVID conversations. And I have a sub-page on my website where I've now collected all of the episodes that I did on COVID or science-related issues into one part or one page. So you can actually see COVID conversations at coralosophy.com/COVID-conversations. And I've collected them all there, as well as some key scientific truisms that led me to this belief, and I still very much support this belief, that risk is a spectrum, and that our job as we return to classrooms and choir rehearsal rooms is to figure out the best place to be on the spectrum for our situation. How low can we get the risk? And we have to consider things that are not just COVID. There are other things that we have to consider. We have to consider the mental health of our singers. We have to consider the context in which our rehearsals happen. Are we a drop in the bucket of a risk at a large school, or are we a community choir that has really no other risks to consider? These are all things that need some nuance and they need some teasing out. So I've collected all that information there, including more expert conversations. Dr. David McKenzie episode was very popular this year, as well as the episode with Dr. Farron Mannion of Mass General. Young Nick Sinkowitz did a great talk with me just about how lay people can read science better. And then most recently, exploded episode 49 with Dr. Tracy Herrick, an epidemiologist, talking specifically about the risks in school from COVID. Is this statement we keep hearing from our colleagues or seeing from our colleagues online that teaching is such an inherently high-risk thing, is that really borne out in the science? Is it borne out in the data? It turns out that it isn't. It's a relatively safe place to work, especially then when considered that other people are going to work too. So if we're going to compare our work environment as teachers to other people who go to work every day, then we start to see a very different picture. And so those episodes, while maybe controversial because they encourage people to think outside of the box that they see online, is very scientifically sound, and I stand behind it. In fact, I've gotten lots of negative feedback from those episodes, but not a single time has somebody been able to challenge one of the things that have been presented on the show factually because ultimately what I'm trying to help us see is that a lot of these things we can say, and we can kind of posture ourselves as believing in science and all of that, but a lot of these things with COVID, guys, are not actually scientific questions. They are questions with science as a backdrop, but they are ultimately moral questions, they are economic questions, they are societal questions that we need science to inform us, but the science is not going to give us a super clear answer on what we should do about a thing. They can tell us where on the risk spectrum is that activity, but a scientist has no more ability to say if we should then go ahead and do it as anyone else. And maybe the expertise that we should seek there is an ethicist, right? We have people whose job it is to look at the ethics of a situation, and that's not necessarily what a virologist's job is or an epidemiologist's job is. Their job is to look at the virus, look at the spread of the virus, that kind of thing. That is what their job is. So that's been very interesting to see how that has unfolded, and those episodes will just stay up for posterity. By the way, on that page, on COVID-conversations on the website, I continue to update it as the science updates. So if, I mentioned earlier, I'm posting things that have valid sources, that have authoritative sources, but the science continues to evolve, meaning that new things get discussed, new things get discovered, new things have consensus forming around them, in which case I go back into the website and not edit it because it was wrong per se, but it was because it was the best information at the time. And I've been keeping that up over the course of the last several months and re-updating it every time new consensus is found. Now, the top episode of 2020 that is not part of either of those categories, I'm kind of going in order now of this episode was a standalone, and it's a little bit tricky to determine in a podcast the top of a year, because as time goes on, more and more people have a chance to come across the show and download it. So the ones from the beginning of 2020 have a lot more stats than the ones that I just posted recently, and that's natural. So I've kind of tried to take that into account with determining my list of top episodes here. But episode 28, which was Don Brenniger talking about different tuning systems, still one of the nerdiest episodes on the show, but very, very popular with you as the audience. About 5,000 people downloaded that episode. It's just awesome. And so that shows that there is an appetite for these kind of technical, nerdy conversations, and that's really important for us to continue to do that. And I'm hoping as COVID vaccinations roll out and as we get back into the classroom, I'm going to have more time to do those types of episodes. So go back and check that one out if you haven't, because it was a fascinating conversation. And then on the topic of of diversity, equity, and inclusion, this was interesting because right before the pandemic, I had decided in February to launch this podcast mini-series, which was called Choral Music, a Human Art Form. And it was a series of conversations. I labeled them episode 29, part 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't know why I did it that way, but I did. And it just kind of helps you see in the podcast feed that they're grouped together. And those got really, really good amounts of downloads as well, which means people sought those out. And that was a really cool thing. So altogether, I'm kind of thinking of those as a big collection that involved a conversation with thousands of people, which I really believe in this topic. And I believe in discussing it without jargon, without judgment, without correct answers up front. You know, that you're truly having the conversations to seek answers, not to posture and not to present your supremely, your great awakening of your knowledge on other people, which is oftentimes how the conversation comes across on social media. And that's been ultimately my beef with the way we discuss this topic in general, is that it tends to be memified, meaning if you can fit on a meme a truism about a social justice related topic, I can tell you right now it's probably oversimplified. No, it is oversimplified. And that oversimplification, even though it's really well intended, can cause harm. Now, the reason memes exist is to spread ideas far and wide, because they spread farther and wider and easier than a podcast does. In other words, people's attention span, it makes it a lot less likely that they will listen to this 30-minute conversation, or listen to an hour and a half long conversation between me and Christopher Harris or Jazz Rucker or Maria Ellis, who are on that series. And so it's harder to spread nuanced conversation. But the harm, in as I see it, comes in from those memes related to social justice, where it might say one thing is true, and then everyone, because you see it shared so much, you accept that that isn't true, or that it is true, and then we lose any sense of nuance. In other words, we lose the ability to say, yes, okay, that's true sometimes, but in this situation, it might not be true, and we should probably listen to people who have that sense of, well, but I'm different, or I'm an outlier. So the danger can be that we lose the individual in these conversations about groups. And I do believe the conversations about group disparities are important, but as long as we're always keeping at the front of our mind to not lose the individual in that conversation. And I think you can do that in a podcast a whole lot better. So that topic, I also created a subpage. So at choralosophy.com, and then if you go under the show, you'll see where all my subtopics are. And you can see choral music, a human art form, and then discussions of diversity and equity and inclusion. And so I added that mini-series there. I've collected all those episodes there. But then I also went ahead and added the large number of episodes over the course of the show that I've done on this topic. So those are the 2 episodes with Jason Ferdinand, equity issues in online education with Dr. Emily Williams Birch. Of course, one of the most popular episodes from 2019 is still up over there, which is Marcus Garrett's episode about non-idiomatic Black composers. You've got what I think is a great episode with Brandon Boyd about choral music, cultural appropriation, and several more. Like I said, I really believe in this topic. You might listen through those episodes and decide that you don't necessarily agree with the way I discuss those topics, but it would be hard to accuse me of not genuinely caring about that topic, because I sure have devoted quite a bit of airtime to that conversation. So the next one on the top episodes of 2020 was episode 32, Resetting the Voice for the Choral Director, with Laurie Sonnenberg. This was an episode where we discussed the new area of danger for vocal damage for choir teachers while teaching in a mask and teaching online. So I encourage you to check that one out if you didn't get a chance to hear it. It was a really cool episode, and we just talked about some real nuts and bolts issues that comes with this new way we are using our voice. Then, of course, there was episode 39, The Birth and Maturation of the Virtual Choir, with Eric Whitaker, and we did discuss the virtual choir, but it didn't end up being really about the virtual choir. It ended up being kind of Eric's dreams for the future of choral music in this reboot that we get to do. So that was a pretty cool one. I would definitely recommend listening to that if you have not. And then next, and this was kind of where I was going with this idea of it's kind of hard to name a favorite if it was posted late in the year, but episode 50 with Dr. Eve Ely busted out quickly to well over 1,000 downloads, and it got a bunch of views on YouTube because the video version was very engaging, and people sent in a lot of feedback of thanks for that episode. So that one was really special, and it was special to me because he was my teacher, but I think ultimately the philosophies of why we teach got discussed in such a unique way in that episode that people resonated with it, and it's definitely worth going back to check out as well. Finally, of those in that group of top topics from 2020 was episode 44, Prioritizing Technique, Not Style, with Andrew Crane and Jamie Rhodes. And this was a dual episode where there were 2 guests, and we discussed the ideas around teaching vocal technique in a choir rehearsal that can almost border on a voice lesson if you know just what to say to not get in the way of certain people's vocal techniques. So there's this age-old debate in choral music, which is that choirs can sometimes make people's vocal techniques worse because of things the choir teacher says. And part of that has to do with the fact that when we are speaking to a group of 60 people, we're speaking to 60 different throats with 60 different techniques and ideas of what to sound like. And so if we say one thing that kind of turns into a a tautology almost of everyone should apply this. Well, it shouldn't necessarily apply to everyone. But what Dr. Crane and Dr. Rhodes have done is kind of boiled their terminology down to things that do indeed apply to everyone and apply to every human voice, singing every style, singing every genre from every single time period. There are certain things that you can carve out that are universal. And that's a beautiful, amazing thing, especially in an education environment. So I encourage you to check that one out. That one is another one of those nuts and bolts episodes that really dives into what to do in the classroom. So you can see kind of a pattern emerging here, where some of the episodes on this show, and I honestly haven't really planned any of these things. These are things that just pop into my head as passions in the moment, and I go do an episode. That's how it all kind of works. And so there's these three categories that have emerged in 2020: the COVID category, the social justice category, and the nuts and bolts category. And those have kind of emerged as the different things that we talk about on the show. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that COVID conversations just goes away. I would like to not still be talking about that as a topic on the show in 2021 or 2022. That would be wonderful. And that means that I could continue to focus more on these other things. And so what I always encourage audience members to do is to like, share, add comments on social media, even though it's a toxic place to discuss things, but still helps people see the show. So those are always things that you can do to help. Leave ratings. Go to the website, play around there, find the content there, use the form to send me feedback if you want to do non-toxic off social media conversations. That's always wonderful as well. And I am hoping in 2021 to get more feedback from you so that I can tailor the conversations more and more to what you need. So thank you again so much for tuning in to this little recap, and also to tuning in to being a member of the show or a part of the show. And all the conversations that you've had on Coralosfer's Facebook page and on social media and behind the scenes have been so appreciated. Again, one final plug of 2020. The vaccine is rolling out, so head over to the website and also get signed up for that Atlanta convention. I would love to see about, 30 to 50 or so. We're going to cap it at 60 for social distancing reasons, but I would love to be in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 people gathering together to have conversations very close to the ones you heard on episode 52 and the episode 44 and those types of things, where we're going to really dig into some of these topics and talk about how to practically apply them in your classroom. So I hope you'll join me Atlanta, April 9 to 11, and you can sign up at coralosophy.com. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great new year, and we'll see you in 2021.